in Psalm 92, many of us know Psalm 92 well. In that, we get to hear Carl sing it on, we get Carl to sing it on Friday night. It's also sung often on Saturday morning, at least the end part. It's part of our Shabbat liturgy in that of the 150 Psalms, only one is dedicated to a day, and that's Psalm 92, dedicated to Shabbat. So I asked Carl just to kind of warm us up if he would sing verse 2, which really is the first verse. Verse 1's, a psalm song for the day of Shabbat. And when Carl sings it at our services, he does so in Hebrew. And now we get to hear and remember what the opening of Psalm 92 sounds like. And after I teach for a half hour, Carl will also sing some other selections from Psalm 92.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's a unique setting of Psalm 92. It comes from Beit Tefillah Yisrael, the synagogue that we visited as a CSP group, actually before CSP. My wife Nancy and I visited there and spent Simchas Torah with them. But my friend Amy Robinson Katz showed me this melody, so I want to share it with you. It's Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot Ladonai Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot Ladonai Ulzamer L'Shimcha Elyon Ulzamer L'Shimcha Elyon Le'hagid B'boker Chasdecha Ve'emunacha B'leilot Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot Ladonai Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot Ladonai Ulzamer L'Shimcha Elyon Ulzamer L'Shimcha Elyon Le'hagid B'boker Chasdecha Ve'emunacha B'leilot.
I so love that melody. And it's one of those melodies that remains in my head throughout Shabbat and ripples forward. So I bring my hands to my heart. Psalms were meant to be sung. And this song, this psalm, in its description, as you'll see in a moment, is to be accompanied by musical instruments, which raises the question, particularly in Orthodox settings, can you play music instruments on Shabbat? And in my letter of invitation, you'll see I have written a long teshuvah with my teacher Elliot Dorff on this very topic. So if you're interested in that question, music on Shabbat, I reference you to my essay. But let's focus on the psalm. I sing this psalm 3 times traditionally. It's sung traditionally on Friday night and said twice on Saturday morning, traditionally. And yet, the value of our having this time together is to appreciate the artistry and the message of the psalm, which takes the depth to another level. And that's what I look to do together in our study time now. So with that, I bring up the psalm. And as many of you know, I spend a lot of time preparing my own translations, and the title is taken from a verse in the psalm. In this case, it's taken from the very beginning. Shabbat, it is good to give thanks. Let me read it through, and then I will delight with you in the purposeful poetic weave. A psalm song for the day of Shabbat. It is good to give thanks to Adonai and to psalm to your name, Most High, to proclaim in the morning your kindness and your faithfulness in the nights, upon a 10-stringer and upon a lute, upon meditative sound of a lyre. For you have made me glad, Adonai, by your actions. Of the work of your hands I will sing joyfully. How great are your works, Adonai! Very deep are your thoughts. A boor will not know, and a fool will not understand this. When blossoming are the wicked like grass, and sprouting are all the workers of iniquity, it is they who will be destroyed forever. And now, because it takes great concentration, the very middle of the psalm, verse 9. A verse of only 4 words, which makes it among the shortest verses in the Bible. A verse that has no verb. Verse 9. But you, height for eternity, Adonai. For behold your enemies, Adonai, for behold your enemies shall perish. They shall be scattered, all the workers of iniquity. And you raise up as that of a wild ox my horn. I luxuriate with fresh oil, and my eye spots those who are watching me. Rising against me, evildoers, attuned is my ear. The righteous, like the palm tree, shall blossom, like a cedar in Lebanon, grow tall, planted in the house of Adonai, in the courtyards of our God, they shall blossom, still bringing forth fruit in old age, full of sap and freshness they shall be, to proclaim, for upright is Adonai, my rock, and no flaw is in God. Now, that phone ringing was right before verse 9. And appropriately so, to make us pay attention to verse 9. Check this out. This is how purposefully written is this psalm. Verse 9 is the dead center of the psalm. You know, I'm into bullseyes of these psalms. Before verse 9, God's name appears, the Yud He Vav He, the Adonai, 3 times. It appears 3 times after verse 9, and once in verse 9, a total of 7 times. The Psalm of Shabbat, that number 7. More than that, there are, if you take off verse 1, which is the introduction, there are 7 verses before verse 9 and 7 verses after. More than that, there are 52 words before and 52 words after. And Rachel Elior, one of our scholars who taught for the Community Scholar Program, did a Shabbaton at CBI, a scholar of Jewish philosophy at Hebrew University, has written a book on how the priests used the solar calendar, and hence 52 weeks, 52 words before and after verse 9. Verse 9. I'm going to come back to verse 9. That's my target, our target, because as you'll see, there are at least 4 different ways these 4 words can be understood as what it means to experience Shabbat. And I say experience because it's a koan, you know, like the Zen Buddhist term, K-O-A-N, koan, in which it's not rationally understood. So you will see verse 9 is a Jewish koan. And the center of Shabbat experience. But let me back up to the beginning. With the beginning, verse 2 is really, the first verse, and it's also part of the introduction. It is good to give thanks to Adonai and to psalm your name most high. So that is, let me begin, because it's really good to psalm. Now, again, there are certain key themes in the psalm that are also, in some sense, linked to Shabbat. To proclaim or to sing, one, to give thanks to God, to praise God's creation, to acknowledge that God is a just God, are the big themes around our relationship of God, what we understand God expects us to acknowledge. And the great medieval commentators Ibn Ezra and Rabbi David Kimchi, Radak, say, although this psalm never mentions the word Shabbat from verses 2 to 16, right? It's the psalm for Shabbat that doesn't mention Shabbat. It's the activity of Shabbat. So in a more general way, the activity of the psalm, which those two commentators say is when you're not working, you have a day of reflection, you can acknowledge the core qualities of God, the need to express gratitude, to praise creation, and to acknowledge punishment of evil and reward of good. Those are the qualities of relationship. And so verse 2 is that introduction. I say that because verse 3, lahagid, to proclaim, comes in verse 16. There's this concept of inclusio in poetic writings, of an opening and closing word to pull it together, the envelope. So lahagid, to proclaim, verses 3 and verse 16, first word. To proclaim in the morning your kindness and your faithfulness in the night. We've seen that key theme. Those are, like in Psalm 87, chesed ve'emet, God's kindness and truth. God's kindness and faithfulness are the core qualities of relationship with God. And that will be paralleled to the statement of verse 16. For upright is Adonai, my rock, meaning steady, and no flaw is in God. So chesed ve'emet is also this quality of uprightness and stable faithfulness. So again, that's the frame of three. And then descriptions of musical instruments. So asur is from the, like eser means 10. So I call it a 10-stringer, often translated as a 10-string instrument or a 10-string lute. And navel, often translated as lute. And this word higayon is lehegeh, yomam v'layla. One should meditate on it day and night, elsewhere in Psalms. So a melody of meditative sound on the kinnor, on the lyre. It's like a harp, but with fewer strings in the biblical tradition. And now verse 5 to 7, for you have made me glad, Adonai, by your actions of the work of your hands I will sing joyfully. How great are your works, Adonai, very deep are your thoughts. A boor will not know and a fool will not understand this. So verses 5 and 7 is celebratory about God's creation and acknowledges evil, those who will not see God's goodness. That is paralleled by verses 11 and 15, again with verse 9 at the center. And you raise up that, this is now about the righteous being protected and singing of God's goodness. So it's reversing the order, right? You raise up as that of a wild ox, meaning straight horns, my horn, like one of those prominent straight horns. Mitsuda translates it as unicorn because it's in the singular, my horn. I luxuriate with fresh oil. You will get the same image of luxuriating with freshness with at the end of the psalm. And my eye spots those who are watching me, rising against me evildoers. Attuned is my ear, meaning I am on guard against the evil. Again, that's the parallel. But now righteous is like the palm tree, shall blossom like a cedar in Lebanon, grow tall, planted in the house of Adonai, in the courtyards of our God, they shall blossom. So this is celebratory around goodness. And I'm going to come back to this image and the contrast between palm trees and cedars and grass. But the image here is parallel to verses 3 and 4, because we imagine this is being sung in the courtyard of the temple. So as there's reference to the courtyard in verses 14 of the temple, the rabbis say this psalm was sung in the temple on Shabbat by the Levites. You can hear them singing every Saturday. So this is when it says proclaim, that is a description of a public singing with musical instruments with an orchestra on the courtyard. Here, verse 6, this image of God's thoughts are not our thoughts, is Isaiah 55:8. And this is, so, God is speaking in Isaiah 55:8, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. Here, you're very deep are your thoughts. God, you are other in terms of not only what you're able to create, but the capacity, both the hiddenness of your reasoning of why you created and how you create has mystery. Verse 6. And again, the boor doesn't understand, they who are evil, but they, verse 8 now, and verse 8 and 10, remember 9 is our bullseye, 8 and 10 are parallel, and they're also the longest verses. They're like triplets instead of doublets, centering in at that middle. It's all about verse 9. So verse 8 and then verse 10. When blossoming are the wicked like grass, and sprouting are all the workers of iniquity. So, it looks like the bad people are doing well, but it is they who will be destroyed forever. Or that's verse 8. And verse 10, for behold your enemies, Adonai, for behold your enemies shall perish. They shall be scattered, all the workers of iniquity. Now this theme of the evil are like grass is a theme you see elsewhere in Torah. I open with the very beginning of Psalms, where the first Psalm, Psalm 1, verse 4, Lo kain harishaim, while the righteous are firmly planted near flowing waters, not so with the wicked. This is verse 1, Psalm 1, verse 4, Ki im kamots asher tidfenu, they are like chaff which will be driven by the wind. So the wicked lack roots in contrast to the righteous. And therefore here, this image of grass, you get elsewhere, Psalm 32:2, grass is the wicked, but usually in the Bible, grass is the human condition, not just the wicked. Job, Psalms, Isaiah will describe our own human condition as temporary, which, like grass, has a short lifespan. And then it turns, it dies and it resprouts. So that's the image of the enemy, those who are boors and fools who do not understand how great are God's works, how deep are God's thoughts. And so now verse 11, again, that's parallel to 5 and 7 with 9 at the center. You raise up that of a wild horn. I luxuriate with fresh oil. I already read that. And that leads to verse 14, planted in the house of Adonai, in the courtyards of our God, they shall blossom, still bringing forth in old age, full of sap and freshness, they shall be. So again, that description of fresh oil with which one is luxuriating. Verse 15, for the righteous, there is longevity, back to yesterday's psalm, orach yamim, length of days, but with vitality, sap flowing. Here again, the image is still being retained of the tree. Righteous are like that deeply rooted tree, and because it's deeply rooted, the sap will continue to flow throughout life, enabling the freshness of its leaves. That's the reward. And now the envelope to proclaim, because the purpose of longevity, the purpose of life, unlike the fools, is to acknowledge, verse 6, how great are your works, Adonai, for deep are your thoughts, to sing God's praises. For upright is Adonai, my rock in who and no flaw is in God. Back to being parallel to the very beginning of verse 3, to proclaim in the morning your kindness and your faithfulness in the night. So now, two more things before we hear Carl sing some more. What is the meaning of verse 9? And what is this talk about trees? Why these two trees? Verse 9. I owe a deep understanding to verse 9 to this book by Benjamin Siegel. He's a contemporary rabbi. I know him. Lovely man living in Jerusalem. And he, when he retired, he's a little older than I am, began to do incredible Bible writing with a literary eye. And here's what he emphasizes. You know, it's often translated, but you are high above for eternity. So high above, right? Marom. The word marom, he says it would be moram if it was high. But this is a noun. So he says these are four nouns in Hebrew. And you, height, eternity, yud he vav he. These can be understood, he writes, in four possible ways. One is in ascending of order. You are high forever, yud he vav he. Or they can be understood as four different addresses to God. You, Marom, that of heights, eternal one, yud he vav he. Or it can be understood as a chiasm, A, B, B, A. So you and Adonai are the intimate ways of addressing God. Marom and La'olam are more second nature. God is of heights, God is eternal. And so it goes from the intimate, or if you will, the intimate toward the transcendent nature of God, which has two qualities, space and time. Space, marom, la'olam is time. So the outer two are the intimate ways of acknowledging God. The two middle ones describe God's transcendence in place and time. And last, it's a way of saying four ways of distinguishing God from us. You and not us, who exists up on high, not on this plane, who lives forever, is not transient, who is distinctly Yud He Vav He and not any other God. I'll pull this together for verse 9. He emphasizes it's a koan. It's four nouns, no verb. And you sit with it and you try to put it together. What does this say about God? It is to experience God directly. It's not a description of what God does, like most of the psalm. Rather, it's four different entry points to experience God as the you that you can speak with, as the marom, the transcendent God of another place, as the olam, as the transcendent God who lives forever, as Yud He Vav He, the God of history and memory. These are ways of encountering God, for ultimately Shabbat is the time of encountering God that transcends words. And verse 9, as the Psalm of Shabbat, has no verb in it. It's simply encounter at the center. So I'll leave that with you in terms of a remember, before and after verse 9, 3 times God's name, 3 times after, once in the middle, and then 52 words before, 52 words after, 7 verses before, 9 is the bullseye. And so the last thing to talk about is this palm tree and this cedar. Palm trees and cedars share some things in common. In contrast to grass, they're both deeply rooted, which allows longevity. A Lebanon cedar can last for 2,000 years. A date palm can last for 100 years, and its dates are only ripe after 10 years. So they are 2 trees that represent deep roots and longevity. Again, the image of the righteous in Psalm 1, deeply rooted and therefore lasting. They're also majestic, tall, and straight. But there's also some differences between a cedar and a date. Cedars grow in the mountains, right, Lebanon, while dates grow in valleys, which means you have to have a lot of land to both be the place of cedars and palm trees. May Israel be an expansive place, or God's world is expansive. Another difference between cedars and dates have fruit and flowers. Cedars are identified with the strength of their wood. In that sense, their very being is their gift that is used for building no less than the temple. The cedars of Lebanon were used to build the temple. And so palms and cedars represent 2 trees that are the image of the righteous, in contrast to the wicked, who are like grass, short-lived, no roots of any depth. The wicked are like the grass, the righteous are like the palm tree and the cedar. And Shabbat is the bullseye of letting go of all the metaphors and trying to experience without that mediation of metaphor, which again, cedars are a metaphor, to experience God with those 4 middle words. Va'ata marom le'olam Adonai, but you, height, eternity, Adonai. With that, Psalm 92, so much more purposefully composed. There's more I could even say, but I want to listen now as I invited Carl to choose what he would want to sing in addition to the introduction of Psalm 92. Go ahead, Carl.
Thanks, Rabbi. Thanks for your teaching. Thanks for your inspiration. Thanks for the opportunity to bring my music to CBI.
Excuse
Can you hear
me.
okay?
Yeah. Rabbi, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can have Carl large, or do you want to leave the words up?
You're muted, Rabbi. There you go. So how appropriate that those of you who I don't know, you can see my name underneath. Ke'erez Balvanon, except I'm Ke'erez Bal Tustin, Tustin, California, one of the cedars of Tustin. So that's appropriate. And also appropriate, Rabbi, I'm sure you probably consider this, that within hours, we're in Tu B'Shvat. And what an appropriate verse, 13, to honor the trees. So this is the more familiar setting. יפרח כארז בלבנון יזכה שתולים בבית אדוני בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו עוז ינובון בשיבה דשנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי צורי ולא עוולתה בו. And with a little more ruach, Tzadik katamar yifrach, yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach, yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach. Ke'erez bavanon yizke, ke'erez bavanon yizke, ke'erez bavanon yizke, yizke. Ke'erez bavanon yizke, ke'erez bavanon yizke, ke'erez bavanon yizke, yizke.
I'm going to give Carl the last word, but a few closing thoughts. Carl, last word, then Kaddish. One is to acknowledge that today is International Holocaust Day, and I am always joyed to see our friend Jack Pariser with us, who has his own firsthand account. And so we pause in terms of a day in which one acknowledges both evil does exist and that it needs to be responded to with justice. Second thing to acknowledge is I have a beloved teacher, Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who's also a psychiatrist who is now in his mid-80s. I got an email this morning that he's now in the hospital. In the Wikipedia article on Psalm 92, Rabbi Twersky, who's written more than 60 books, is cited for an article that he wrote on Psalm 92, in which he builds on a midrash in which he says that the midrash is that this psalm was composed by Adam in experiencing his first Shabbat. Adam being created on Erev Shabbat, just before Shabbat, is the last act of creation. And Rabbi Twersky comments in this article that it was, when it's entitled a psalm song it should be on the day of Shabbat, for it was sung on the day of Shabbat by Adam, experiencing the first day, full day of Adam in creation, celebrating the goodness of creation. Rabbi Twersky is so wonderful in so many ways, a Hasidic rabbi who became a psychiatrist who dedicated his life to working with addictions. A remarkable man. So I honor him and bring him to mind in light of his needs for prayer. And last, a word about Carl. What is so remarkable about you, Carl, including the songs you've just sung to us, is that these are melodies and a role that you've taken on just in recent years, in adulthood. You are like Rabbi Akiva, one who demonstrates lifelong learning and spiritual growth. And so it's always a treat to have that dimension of your presence as well. Carl, a closing word about Psalms and being our song leader?
Just a sentence of gratitude to thank you, Rabbi, for the opportunity to share my music with the CBI community and with the larger learning community out there. A great idea you had to pick me to do this one for the things that you pointed out. The verse 4 that mentions all the instruments. A guitar had not been invented back in temple times, but had it been, it would have been in the list. So I'm pleased to be able to play a string instrument and kind of bring us back to those temple days, Songs of the Sacrifices. But great to that you chose that, and for my namesake as well. So good thinking. I'm honored to do it, and it was a pleasure to see you all and to sing for you all. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Carl. So today I invite those who are now seeking to say Kaddish to rise and join together if there's a loved one who you would wish to honor. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Amen.
V'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayeichonu v'yomeichonu v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael b'agalau v'zman kari v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach leolam olmei maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha barichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran bialma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. As we get ready to close, I want to honor and acknowledge Carl's wife Nancy and his cousin Margie for joining us, in part to honor Carl, but also to learn Psalms today. Tomorrow, Psalm 93 comes right after Psalm 92 on Friday nights. It's very short. We're going to be honoring our other prayer leader, Hal Hurwitz, tomorrow and looking at Psalm 93. This week, honoring our three prayer leaders with Amy Robinson Katz, Carl Cedar, and Hal Hurwitz. I look to see you tomorrow for Psalm 93. Blessings to all of a good day. Thank you for joining together.
Thanks.